Hello, everybody, and welcome to our weekly Q&A with the Family Support Department at the St. Louis ARC. I'm Sharon Spurlock, the Senior Director of Family Education, and I've got my colleague Hannah with me today so that we can talk to you all about training. And you may think this is kind of an oddball topic, but I think it's really important for families to know how we prepare our support staff to take care of your family member. If I was a family member, I would want to be really aware of that so that I'd know what to expect from not just the ARC, but any other agency I was going to engage with. And I do think as families and people with disabilities, it's you have the right to ask, how are you preparing the staff to work with me and or my family member? What do they learn? So that's what we're going to learn about today. And I'm here to welcome Sue Shaw and Carlton McKinney Jr., our two members of our training team, to talk to us about how we prepare our staff. So I'm going to start with Sue and have you introduce yourself, and then we'll go straight to Carlton.
Okay, my name is Sue Shaw. I started in the field supporting people with disabilities, date myself now, at the end of 1989, in an apartment building. And a year later, we opened the first 24-hour Medicaid waiver site in Missouri. And I was a 23-year-old house manager who was told when we moved people out of the habilitation center, the behavior would go away. And that's laughable now because we didn't know how to support people really well with a lot of that. Things were flying through the air. I didn't know how to support myself, how to support the staff. Learned a lot of that the hard way. As time went on, I also supported people in what our Connect program is, people who needed, at that point, like 5 to 20 hours a week of support. And did that for a few years, and then moved into, when my kids were little, into staff training. Did that for, I guess it was about 15 years, doing staff training through Bridges Training Network, and then moved back in as associate director in an organization that supported people with very extensive behavior and medical needs. So we had 45 people. Some of them had 24-hour 2-on-1 awake staff. So very high support needs. Moved from that. Then I taught advanced CPR, BLS in the hospitals while I had some high need young adults without disabilities staying in my home. And then back to the ARC. It's been, I think, 4 years and 8 months now that I came here to start as staff trainer.
Hello, hello. My name is Carlton McKinney Jr. I started with the agency back in February of 2008. I just celebrated 17 years with the organization. I started off in our day service program, supporting folks in the community, taking them out to volunteer sites, work sites, leisure activities, just having a grand time out in the community. And then about 2020, when COVID kicked off, got promoted to assistive tech specialist. So then I started training and helping the people we support with technical devices, such as iPads, cell phones, computers, televisions, helping them to be able to stay connected with their loved ones through Zoom and through Teams. And then got promoted to a trainer in the quality and training department back in November of 2024. So now I've been in the training department now for what, 5 months now? 5.5 months now. So, yep.
It's like he's always been there now, I bet, Sue.
Yes.
So let's start off with sort of a timeline and think about a new employee coming into the ARC. What's the first thing we do to set them up for success?
The first thing that happens is they come in on a Friday morning. We make sure they have all their documentation and hiring is complete, and then we teach them. Right now, 3 hours. We're about ready to expand that to 6 hours, but on all of the things they need to start their job. So things like rights, abuse and neglect. What is our philosophy? What does supporting someone with a disability look like? What are some of our policies and procedures? So it's a lot of things that are required by our funding sources. What is home and community-based waiver? What are bloodborne pathogens? Just things that we need to touch on the first day. Those are things that we don't expect them necessarily to remember all of it. It's a lot thrown at them very quickly. But to start those conversations, especially those philosophy type conversations, so that we can continue to reinforce those.
Carlton, can you tell us a little bit about the lunch break on the first day?
Yeah, so on the lunch break on the first day, we have individuals from our Asian with Empowerment program that comes over and actually sit with the new hires and have a conversation with them and let them know like how things go in their program, how things are going in their life, what they like to see in the new employees that come in, and what's their favorite thing about the staff that they're working with now. Which, yes, I am one of the favorite staff members that they like. And so it's a grand time that the agency provide lunch for the new employees and also for the people we support so that way they can be able to be accolade and in tune with them, because a lot of people that come in never worked in this field before. When I started 17 years, I was like, what am I getting myself into? So for the lunching piece to happen, I think it's phenomenal.
Yeah, it's my favorite part, I think. One part I don't know very much about, Sue, and I'd love to know what happens. As I understand it, our CEO and president, Mark Keeley, comes to every new employee orientation to welcome our new employees. What does he tell them?
He tries to be there in person. Every once in a while, we have to show a video, but he asks them about their background. He tells them a little bit about what he did. He encourages them to move through the organization. And then he talks a little bit about the organization, how he doesn't want to be the biggest organization in town, how he's really focused on quality. And then he gives them his cell phone number. And he does that not because he needs something to do on Saturday night, but because he wants to know 3-4 weeks in what they've liked about their job, what they don't like about their job, so that he asks them then to come back and give that information to him.
Okay, so you've set me up for success. I've had 3 to 6 hours of training, met the CEO, and now what happens? I go out to my job site, and that's the end of it.
Actually, that afternoon, we're putting them in either, right now, it'll change soon, but we're putting them either in CPR or Relias. So I'm going to let Carlton say a little bit about CPR.
Yes, so anytime those that's coming in that either has not had CPR on first aid before or their CPR and first aid certificate has expired, they go into a classroom and we basically go through about 3.5 hours, give or take, of training, hands-on training for CPR and first aid, teaching them that if an emergency happened, you are going to be the first responder. You are going to be the first one on the scene, not EMS, not the police, you are. So we want to be sure that the staff is trained properly to be able to handle those situations if they occur, and how they can go through the steps to be able to do so. So they watch videos. We do hands-on activities with them, such as CPR, compressions and breaths, show them how to do an AED properly, put on an AED if we have to use one. We never had one so far. And then also they take a test, and we don't call it a test. We call it a celebration of learning. Celebration of learning at the end of the class, just to be sure that they got all the information that they need out of us. And to be honest, the class, I have to say, at first I was a little nervous to start teaching it, but then once I got in tune with it, it became a lot more fun.
Yeah.
And then the
I
other
had
piece of that.
taken CPR and first aid at least 20 times because you have to renew every 2 years. And I will say I never regret it. There's always some new thing that the trainer shares with us, or a personal story that really has impact that helps me to remember. Because I know that when you're in emergency, it's really hard to go back and think about what you learned a year and a half ago. And I think those stories that you guys tell are so important. I'm sorry I interrupted you, Sue.
No, it's absolutely fine. Yeah, with employment, they started thinking about maybe they wouldn't do CPR and first aid anymore if funders don't require it. But we actually had someone have an emergency where they choked on the job. And so, we look at those kind of things and say, okay, this staff really does need this. We also have, and something that Carlton has been doing is we realize that only 1 in 4 people with breasts get saved automatically because people are afraid of touching them, or that they, might get in trouble for that. So some of those things that we start looking at the statistics. So now we have a mannequin that has breasts so that we can talk about that. And then the other piece we pick up that afternoon, if somebody's already got CPR, and it has to be in-person CPR, but if they already have that, we have some online classes that our staff need to take that fill in some of those gaps, things like back safety and a little more in-depth abuse and neglect and defensive driving that those staff will start on if they've already got CPR and first aid.
Can you talk a little bit about that platform, Relias? Because I think there's the basic stuff that we use all the time, but it's so much richer than that.
Yeah, you go on to a platform online. We pay our staff while they're doing that, and we assign some different trainings. One of them is like a day in the life where you're interacting with what a person's day might look like. I laugh about that one because honestly, I took that one as somebody asked me to see what I thought of it. And my first reaction was I was angry at it, like really mad. And I was like, this isn't a good training. And then I went, no, this is a really good training. It's making me react to how this person's being treated and making me really process some of it. So some of those classes are really good just because they make staff look at it from a different perspective. And it varies what those classes look like, but they're constantly updating them. So that's something else we do is review those classes and see what they look like and which ones we want staff to take and which ones need to be live.
Fantastic. So I know that this is a complicated question, so I'm going to have you guys maybe go back and forth about it a little bit, but we have multiple people that fund our services. So every staff person has their own training plan based on where they work and who provides the funding for that program. And can you talk about some of the diversity of that? Like, obviously, almost everybody needs CPR and first aid because if you're going to be directly working with somebody, that's just good practices. But we also offer something like MANT that's not necessary for a lot of people. So I'm going to turn it over to the two of you to go back and forth.
We do have a MANT program, and with MANT, so MANT is a relational approach training that focuses on preventing and de-escalating any kind of behavior interactions going on. And so not every program in our agency is required to take MANT. But most of them do. Some of the individuals that we support, some of the staff that we deal with, they actually just want to take them just because they want to see how it is and how it goes and what goes all into it. But I only say like maybe two of our departments don't need math. I want to say, if I'm right or wrong, Sue. Think I'm right on that?
Yeah, there's a couple, and there's some that have taken it one time to get the philosophy piece. But don't necessarily take it over and over again as well.
And then
here's a secret fact. We have looked at whether there's a possibility to offer MANT for families, where we might partner as two different departments to do some of that. So if anybody's interested in something like that, you can reach out directly to me. What are some of the other trainings that maybe are specific to a funding source?
Documentation and InfoServe are two classes that we do really quickly with, especially our residential staff. So how do you document anything that happened? What are best practices with taking notes? Employment does that on their own because their outcomes look a little bit different. And then InfoServe would be how do you access the records of people that we're supporting. We have all of our medication documentation goes on InfoServe. Also, medication would be another one that's very specific to staff that give people medication, right? So all of our residential homes pretty much have people that take that medication, and they take it one time. They have to pass a state test. That's 50 questions, and then they renew that every 2 years. So they're getting more information every 2 years on that.
I think that's unbelievably important. At our trivia event last week, one of the questions that we asked to honor our pharmacy team was how many medications does the St. Louis ARC's team pass in the year, and it's approximately 800,000. Like, it was a ridiculous
Wow.
number of, when you include topical medications and all the different things. So having training so that and you feel confident in being able to do that is so important.
I was just going to say, not everybody's automatically passed on those classes. They really do have to meet a threshold, and they have to be able to read a medication bottle. So we're not going to read the test to them either. They have to be able to do that on their own so that we make sure that it's done to the highest quality.
That I was going to piggyback off of. So when I started 17 years ago, we was not this advanced with training when it came to certain things like med and meds. We did when I got hired, we didn't take a test. And not saying that I wouldn't have passed it, okay, but we didn't do a 50 question test. But I feel like if we did back then, a lot of errors that happened then would not have happened if we were able to. But we've been able to advance over the last 17 years, dealing with a lot of trainings. And then to also piggyback off what Sue said about research. So with MET, so when you're first hired in, if you never had MET, it is a 2-day course, curriculum that you have to go through. And then we work on building healthy relationships, how to talking about the crisis cycle, how, like, if an individual is in a part of a crisis cycle, how you will respond, how staff will respond. And then the next day we will go into physical skills, where we would train them on how to be able to support them. And if we have to do a restraint, which we have not had to do one in a while, if you had to do a restraint, how to properly do a restraint, due by the law of the MET system. And so then after that, the next year you'll just come back. So MET is the only class that we have that you have to take every year. And the next year is only 1 day. Because a lot of people say, I got to take it 2 days. No, after that, unless you expire. Now, if you expire, then you have to go back to the 2 days.
Back to the beginning.
Back to the
So I'm
beginning.
going to ask a little bit of a sideways question with that. There's a lot of different systems that we could use to address people with problematic behavior and how to support them in the best way. How do you choose which curriculum's the right curriculum for us?
That's really something that over years we've looked at different curriculums, especially with MANT, because there are, my goodness, countless curriculums that look at crisis prevention. And a lot of it is what supports people best, what puts people at the least amount of risk. So like MANT develops their physical skills with a biomechanical engineer in looking at that. They look at how long you would keep somebody maybe in a hold or support. So some of those things that they're really careful with, how we don't hyperextend or hurt anyone. And we just feel like some of the other curriculums aren't quite as careful about that. And they've also really moved into looking at people who have experienced trauma, which 80 to 90% of our the people we support will have, and how some of those supports or holds can be traumatizing to people. And so how we can talk about that so that we're preparing people for that. So they're one of the few curriculums really recognizing that and moving into how we, even staff, how we support staff who are having to walk through these physical skills, but may have some problems with some of the physical skills due to their history as well.
That was an excellent segue. I'm going to go ahead and just talk a little bit about, trauma-informed services is something that we've been talking about for years and years in our field. And yet that component of MANT wasn't there when I started.
It was not.
And learn MANT. So we've recognized and have expanded our training to be more trauma-informed. Sue, can you talk a little bit about the grant that we got and how you all are doing the new training?
Sure. So, we started with a basic trauma training that was about 2 to 3 hours, depending on whether or not people supervised other staff. And from there, really started building what it looks like to be trauma informed. And then a little over a year ago, or about a year ago, we got a grant that looks at mental health first aid as well. So mental health first aid it doesn't diagnose or treat. What it looks like is recognizing early symptoms of mental health challenges, moderate and severe, and how do we support both the people we support and staff through those different reactions so that we can catch it early, so we're supporting people through it. And then we've also been able then to refer them internally to some counseling as needed, and also to do some education with the families as needed with that. So it's been a really interesting progression for us, because we didn't a lot when I first started even here 5 years ago, a lot of times we would say that a behavior was because that person had a certain disability. And more we're realizing that, yes, sometimes that happens. Obviously, somebody who is autistic may stem for one reason or another, but also 80 to 90% of people with disabilities have some sort of trauma history. And I had a young man move into my house at 18 who we were seeing a lot of the same behavior you might see from somebody who has a disability, and it was trauma-based. So we started really looking at, what is this behavior based on trauma they've experienced or on the disability that they have? And I think that's a big change in how we start supporting people, because if it's a reaction to past trauma, we're going to look at it and support it differently.
I think that's so interesting. And I've heard you tell stories about how you respond to employees in training differently now when you're thinking about it through the trauma lens, which that could be a whole different category that we talk about. Is there anything about that you want to say?
Just knowing that, it used to be, we had a staff person who had been with us over a year and was in a training, and all of a sudden they were putting their hoodie on, they were putting on sunglasses, they were crunched down really small in their chair. And, in the past I might have said, wow, it emailed a supervisor and said, your staff person was really rude in class today. But it was very, very obvious at this point that that wasn't being rude. That was something happened that made them feel unsafe, and they were reacting to it. So that obviously, if they're a valuable staff person, they've been successful for over a year, we need to look at how do we support them to support others instead of throwing them away, which maybe that's extreme, but
I think that's to me, training as a whole, and then that level of engagement with the staff, that's what makes our staff stay. So I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about those extra trainings we offer staff because of our quality indicators, our accreditation. And I'd love to also talk about some of the ways we teach side by side, where people with disabilities and in staff are learning together.
So one of the other trainings that we actually have is called Core Booster. With Core Booster, we do talk a little bit about trauma a lot about trauma in Core Booster. We also let the people let the staff see the palm interviews that we do with the people we support. Sharon, you have done a lot of those. Those are great interviews to have to see. And then we also talk about the agency's core values or whatnot, which is collaboration, empowerment, and respect. And so with Core Booster, that's done. The staff come in, I think they're 6 months to a year, they'll get that course.
Yeah, it's right. It's rated actually. So we do foundation 1, which reinforces that abuse, neglect, rights, all that. And then we hit it about a year after that, where we do Core Booster, where they get it every 2 years after that.
Every 2 years of that, which actually that's the first training that I actually started teaching as a trainer, was before I became full-time trainer, was Core Booster. Or whatnot. And so we do that with them, and we do activity at the end with the trajectory star. Basically, we figure out a problem that we're having with the person that we're supporting, and we figure out how we can assist them dealing with family health, spiritual health, technology health, and psychologically help or whatnot. And so it's to me, for me, that star has helped along the way within my journey here with the ARC, and a lot of staff members also said that it has helped them as well solve issues at work and also in their personal life. So Core Booster is one class I think that everybody should take in our agency, no matter what department you're in.
Sue, are there other things that are specific to the ARC because of our philosophy and values?
Yeah, so one of the things, and I know Sharon helps teach this class, is we call it Foundation 2, and it looks at people having social roles. Because a lot of times people with disabilities become fairly isolated and they don't have social roles in the community. So what does a social role look like? How would somebody, are they involved in something that if they didn't come, would they be missed? So what does that look like? And we play with building that social role. So we don't have people that each staff person is supporting there all day. It would be a long day, but what we do have them look at is who is somebody that they support and what are that person's strengths, and how could we build a social role around that. And a lot of our staff take that back to that person at the end of the day. And we've had some really interesting things happen. We had somebody who was going to the library kind of at the end of the pandemic and checking out books for the people around the houses around where they lived in their house, and then returning them. They also thought about putting together a library. I don't know if that happened or not, one of those little libraries.
Library.
But yeah, we've had some people develop podcast type things. So lots of things that have actually come to fruition through that class as well.
That's exciting. We have a couple questions. I want to make sure I get those answered. The first one, I know the answer, but I'll ask you, how do we offer trainings about using respectful language?
We do. So we hit it the first time in new employee orientation. We talk a lot about what our core values are. We talk about what does that person prefer to be called, because some people might be want to be a person who's autistic, or even just a person. Some people may actually want to be an autistic person. Because that is how they see themselves, that defines them. And then we talk a lot about the terminology that is used. So instead of that we feed them, that we're supporting them with eating, instead of going on outings they're going out shopping and we're using the same words that everybody else uses. And then that's probably my biggest one. And honestly, it may come out of my mouth every once in a while, but that whole word nonverbal makes people think that that person can't communicate. So instead of that, a person who doesn't use words to communicate, where we're making it very clear to the doctor or the shopkeeper or whoever that this person can communicate, they're just not communicating using words.
Love it. Oh, this is such a juicy question. I just love it. And I want to talk about it for another half an hour, but I'll just turn it over to you all for a quick wrap up. Can parents get involved in trainings at all, either for planning the trainings or being at live trainings to give a parent perspective?
We haven't done that yet. We will have 6 hours for new employee orientation starting in the second half of July. So I'm excited to be able to pull in more of that. I know that one of the people who works for the ARC who has a disability is going to start doing that new employee orientation tour starting then. So yeah, I would love to have that. The other piece is how can you get trained? So I know Sharon just said that MANT might be a possibility. The other thing that we can do with our mental health first aid grant, and we are planning on doing, is offering a mental health first aid training, probably on a Saturday. Excuse me, we can take up to 30, and maybe we can, if we have more than that want it, we could do that as well. So certainly something we can look at. We do have, it's not just Carlton and I, we have a variety of trainers who do train, and some of them do have children who have disabilities, or have been caregivers in one way or another.
Yeah, I think we recognize that expertise that lived experience brings. And I'm not going to share too much about Sue's personal life, but Sue's had many parenting experiences that she brings to the conversation when she's teaching that help reinforce the material. So, so that's a great point. And I think I'm going to just end things there. So have a great rest of your week. Thank you, Carlton and Sue and Hannah. Have a great
Thanks
day.